Samson stands as a towering figure in biblical history, a man of incredible strength chosen by God to deliver the Israelites from the oppressive rule of the Philistines. His story, a dramatic blend of power, passion, and tragedy, unfolds during a turbulent period in Israelite history. Samson's life, though marked by extraordinary feats of strength, is also a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked desires and the devastating consequences of succumbing to temptation. He was a Nazirite dedicated from birth to God and granted supernatural strength to fulfill his divine purpose. He was to be a champion for his people, a deliverer who would break the chains of Philistine dominance. His extraordinary strength was not merely a physical attribute, but a manifestation of God's power working through him. It was a gift meant to be used for the liberation of his people, a tool to break the yoke of oppression. However, Samson's story is not simply one of triumphant heroism. While empowered by God, Samson was also burdened by his own flaws, his susceptibility to temptation, and his volatile nature. His tale serves as a stark reminder that even those chosen by God are not immune to the human condition. Samson's story takes a dramatic turn when he becomes enamored with a Philistine woman from Timnah. This attraction sets the stage for a series of events that would have profound consequences for Samson and his people. For Samson, a Nazirite dedicated to serving God and liberating his people, to fall in love with a woman from the enemy camp was a dangerous and controversial decision. His parents, deeply concerned about the implications of this union, pleaded with him to choose a wife from among his own people. Marriage in those times was not simply a personal matter, but a social and political act, a way of forging alliances and solidifying tribal identities.
Despite my parents' pleas, I remained resolute in my desire to marry the Philistine woman.
This act of defiance foreshadowed the pattern of impulsive behavior that would characterize much of Samson's life. Samson's insistence on marrying the Philistine woman reveals a crucial aspect of his character, his strong will and his tendency to follow his own desires. This headstrong nature, while contributing to his incredible strength and daring, also proved to be his greatest weakness. It would lead him down a path of conflict, betrayal, and ultimately tragedy. The conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines was not merely a political struggle for land and resources. It was a clash of cultures, religions, and ways of life. The Israelites, followers of the one true God, Yahweh, were a pastoral people, deeply rooted in their ancestral traditions and religious practices. The Philistines, on the other hand, were a seafaring people, originating from the Aegean region, who had settled along the coastal plains of Canaan. They worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, and their culture was characterized by a more materialistic and militaristic ethos. The Philistines, with their advanced weaponry and organized military, posed a constant threat to the Israelites. This oppression created a climate of fear and resentment among the Israelites, who longed for a leader who could deliver them from Philistine domination. Samson, with his God-given strength, was seen as the fulfillment of this hope, the champion who would restore their freedom and dignity. The cultural and religious differences between the two peoples further exacerbated the conflict. Samson's marriage to a Philistine woman was not simply a personal choice, it was a symbolic act that highlighted the deep divisions between the two cultures. On his way to Timnah to visit his betrothed, Samson encountered a young lion. This encounter would become a pivotal moment in his story, a dramatic display of his supernatural strength and a foreshadowing of the events to come. Without any weapon, relying solely on his God-given strength, Samson tore the lion apart with his bare hands. This act of raw power demonstrated the extraordinary nature of his abilities and confirmed his role as a divinely chosen champion. Later, on his return journey, Samson came across the carcass of the lion. To his surprise, he found a swarm of bees had built a hive within the lion's remains, and the carcass was filled with honey. This discovery of honey in the lion's carcass carried a symbolic meaning. The lion, initially a symbol of danger and death, had been transformed into a source of sweetness and nourishment.
This act of sharing the honey can be seen as a symbolic sharing of my victory over the lion, a testament to the joy and hope that my strength brought to my family and, by extension, to my people.
This juxtaposition of strength and sweetness, violence and nourishment would become a recurring theme in Samson's life. During the week-long wedding feast, Samson posed a riddle to the Philistine wedding guests.
Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet.
This riddle, drawn from his encounter with the lion and the honey, was not merely a playful game. It was a challenge to the Philistines, a test of their wit and a subtle assertion of his own superiority. The Philistines, unfamiliar with this specific event, were baffled by the riddle. Unable to solve the riddle themselves, the Philistines resorted to threats and coercion to extract the answer from Samson's wife. They threatened to burn her and her father's house if she did not reveal the answer. Under duress, Samson's wife succumbed to the pressure and betrayed her husband's trust. She pleaded with Samson to reveal the answer, using tears and emotional manipulation to wear down his resolve. Samson, blinded by his love for her, finally relented and told her the answer. This betrayal marked a turning point in Samson's story, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to violence, revenge, and ultimately tragedy.
Betrayal's sting. Samson's wife's betrayal cut him deeply.
Her act of betrayal shattered that trust, revealing the fragility of their relationship and the deep cultural divide that separated them. Samson felt not only the sting of personal betrayal, but also the humiliation of being outsmarted by his enemies.
The Philistines, through their manipulation of my wife, had gained a victory over me, albeit a small one, but it was a victory nonetheless.
The Philistines, armed with the answer provided by Samson's wife, triumphantly presented the solution to the riddle.
Enraged by the betrayal and humiliation, I realized the extent of my wife's deception.
This realization marked a turning point in his life, a moment of disillusionment and a hardening of his heart.
The betrayal also exposed my own vulnerability.
This experience would leave a lasting scar on his heart, making him more cautious and distrustful in the future.
Vengeance unleashed. Burning with anger and a thirst for revenge, I set out to avenge the humiliation I had suffered at the hands of the Philistines.
He traveled to Ashkelon, a Philistine city, and killed 30 men, taking their garments to pay the forfeit for losing the riddle bet.
My act of vengeance was swift and merciless.
The 30 Philistine men he killed were not merely innocent bystanders. They represented the enemy, the oppressors who had humiliated him and threatened his wife.
Taking their garments was not simply an act of plunder. It was a symbolic gesture of stripping them of their dignity and honor.
By using their garments to pay the forfeit for the riddle, Samson was making a mockery of their traditions and customs.
A violent retribution marked a turning point in my story.
It was a clear indication that he was no longer willing to tolerate the Philistines' oppression and that he would use his God-given strength to fight against them. This act of vengeance, however, would not bring an end to the conflict. It would only fuel the cycle of violence, drawing Samson deeper into a spiral of revenge and destruction.
The cycle of violence. My act of vengeance against the Philistines in Ashkelon did not bring an end to the conflict. Instead, it ignited a cycle of violence that would continue to escalate.
The Philistines, enraged by Samson's killing of their men, retaliated by burning Samson's wife and her father. This act of brutality demonstrated the ruthlessness of the Philistines and their willingness to resort to extreme measures to exact revenge.
The death of my wife and her father further fueled my rage and strengthened my resolve to fight against the Philistines.
He saw their deaths as a direct result of the Philistines' treachery and their unwillingness to honor the terms of the riddle.
My response to the Philistines' retaliation was swift and devastating.
He used his superhuman strength to wreak havoc among them, striking fear into their hearts and demonstrating his unwavering commitment to their destruction. This cycle would ultimately lead to his downfall, highlighting the destructive nature of unchecked anger and the tragic consequences of pursuing vengeance. Divine intervention. Throughout his life, Samson's extraordinary strength was attributed to divine intervention. He was a Nazirite dedicated to God from birth, and his strength was a gift from God granted to him for a specific purpose: to deliver the Israelites from Philistine oppression. His strength was not simply a physical attribute, it was a manifestation of God's power working through him. Samson's strength was not constant, it was contingent on his obedience to the Nazirite vow. This vow included abstaining from alcohol, avoiding contact with dead bodies, and not cutting his hair. As long as he adhered to these restrictions, God's power flowed through him, granting him superhuman strength. However, His susceptibility to temptation and his volatile nature often led him astray. This internal struggle between divine purpose and human fallibility would ultimately define his tragic story.